bet you're wondering why I'm holding a basketball, particularly when my sport is football. And it's basketball sometimes too. I love talking about basketball. But I'm going to use this basketball to disprove climate change. I'm going to take my expertise as an engineer and science and ability to know something about math to disprove climate change. Basketball is like the world. And the world is a globe. It's round and it spins on an axis, and the sun shines on it. You know, the sun can shine here, and this side's going to be dark over here, and this part up here, since the sun is directly here, this is going to be the hottest part of the earth, you know, right around the equator. And basketball even has a line there. That could be the equator. So the sun is hottest around the equator, and at the polar caps and the bottom, the Antarctic and the Arctic, that's the coldest. The concern is that as the earth warms up, the oceans will rise and they'll cover up the earth with water. So I put my engineering ability, my engineering expertise together, and so let's calculate how deep the water could possibly get. This globe is going to have to get bigger as the water gets deeper, and that deeper water covers the earth and floods the land, supposedly according to the climate change people. My theory is that there's not enough water in the earth to expand it, to make it deeper, to cover all the land. The first thing you have to understand is that the average tidal difference when the earth spins and the moon's over here, the moon actually pulls the water up and creates high tide, and when it creates low tide as the water levels out. And the average tidal difference around the world is 3 feet. 3 feet, not 2 feet. Every day, it expands 3 feet, goes down 3 feet up. Sometimes it's bigger, 6 feet, 12 feet, depending on where you are in the world when it happens, and where the moon is as well, because the moon is what causes the oceans to expand. So an average of 3 means what you see every day when you look out to the ocean, up 3 feet, down 3 feet. That's about it. I'm 6 foot tall, so that's about half as tall as I am every single day. Let's say instead of 3 feet, we wanted to make the water rise 6 feet. The city of Miami is just above 6 feet above sea level. So that would mean the water wouldn't quite even hit Miami yet, which is probably one of the closest cities to the ocean. How much water would it take to do that? Well, I actually calculated that in a calculation. And I'll demonstrate the city of Miami is completely safe. It's like when Barack Obama bought on Martha's Vineyards, and he's probably about 5 feet above sea level, why he's not in danger. I'll show you why he's not either. So here's the calculation. So as a young kid, they always taught me to put my name on the paper when we're doing some calculations. So I went to the University of Texas, studied civil engineering. I was a former licensed civil engineer. I'm a former licensed structural engineer. All right, so let's talk about the globe. So there's the globe. There's the earth itself. And it's a big, big sphere like I showed you on that basketball. And now what we want to do is calculate the volume of water if this sphere were to rise 6 feet. So if we had a 6 foot increase above sea level, that means all this water would now increase the volume of the sphere of the earth. The radius of the earth is 3,959 miles. So if we add 6 feet to the level there, that makes it 3,959.0014, because all we're doing is adding 6 feet to the diameter of the earth. Well, each mile is 5,280 feet, and you add 6 feet to it. That's how we get the 0.0014. So now what we're going to do is calculate the volume of the earth based on the bigger sphere minus the volume of the earth minus the smaller sphere. So given the radius of the earth is 3,959 miles, 3 feet tidal difference is typical today, and the volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. You can actually put that into calculation and figure that out. So to calculate additional volume of water required to have the oceans rise 6 feet high, basically the level of Miami, let's do that calculation. So the volume of the globe at a 6 foot depth, 4/3 pi r cubed, and there is the 3,959.0014 cubed times pi times 4/3. And there's the calculation. It comes out to 259,923,466,100 cubic miles volume. And then we want to calculate the volume of the earth itself. And basically that comes out to 259,923,241,564 cubic miles. We subtract those two, and there we get the volume of the water required to raise the oceans 6 feet. That's 224,000 cubic miles of water. Moving on to page 2 of my calculations. let's figure this out. So the total volumes, now we've got to remember that 224,000 cubic miles of water. So the total volumes of all the ocean right now is 326 million cubic miles. The total volume of the ice caps is 4 million cubic miles. The total volume of the groundwater is 5 million cubic miles. There's more groundwater than there are in the polar ice caps. The volume of the lakes and rivers and wetlands is 97,000 cubic miles. And the volume of all the atmospheric water in the weather, in the rain, in the clouds is 13,000 cubic miles. Okay, those are the givens. Those are the facts that we're dealing with. We're dealing with everything in cubic miles because the Earth is so big, it's easier to deal with that way. Just say, for example, it's never going to happen, but so if all the atmospheric water rained down, just basically filled up the oceans would rise. Basically, there's the total volume of the atmospheric water, 13,000, divided by the total volume of the 6-foot depth. It would only rise 0.35 foot. So about 4 inches is if all the atmosphere water rained down. Well, we know that's impossible. That's never going to happen. And they don't even talk about that. But let's say if all the rivers ran to the sea. There's a Led Zeppelin song. If all the rivers ran to the sea, I would still be loving you. Anyway, so if all the rivers ran into the ocean and they were no longer on land, rivers, lakes, and everything, there's 97,000 cubic miles divided by the 224. It would raise the oceans 2.6 feet. So if all the rivers and lakes flowed into the ocean, it still would not be any deeper than the average tidal difference of 3 foot. So there's just not enough water in the world. Well, what they talk about is what if the polar ice caps melt? Because if the polar ice caps melt, I mean, there's 4 million cubic miles of water in the polar ice caps. Well, here's the problem with that. As we pointed out, the Earth is a globe, and the average temperature is 0 degrees in the summer in the North Pole and minus 40 in the winter. So that means in order to get the polar ice caps to melt, that means the temperature of the Earth must rise 32 degrees in the summer, 72 degrees in the winter, which means if the average temperature of the Earth today is about 70 degrees, it would have to go, the average temperature would have to go to 140 degrees. So before the polar ice caps would melt, we would probably all burn up. So it's impossible to have the polar ice caps melt, or it's impossible to have a problem of the polar ice caps melt, because we're going to have a problem with the temperature of the Earth before the polar ice caps ever melt. And you know, when you have a big cup of venti iced coffee, that the ice doesn't melt right away. It takes a long time because it's kind of cool. So we have years and years and years and years, even if the Earth temperature was to rise that much. So we don't have to worry about the polar ice caps melting. In all this is that in my 65 years of living on Earth, I still go down to Pacific Beach here in California. I could probably still go back to Galveston, which I haven't been to since 1976, and look at the water. And the water level is exactly the same. Now, the oceans are not rising, and there's no danger of the oceans ever rising, because even if all the atmospheric water fell down and all the rivers ran into the sea, it still wouldn't rise it any more than 3 feet, which is the average tidal difference. There's no way the polar ice caps are going to melt. Bottom line is this: when they tell you that the oceans are rising and they tell you the world's going to flood, they're lying to you, just like they lied to you about the cognitive ability of Joe Biden, just like they're lying to you about the cognitive ability of Kamala Harris, just like they lied to you about Russia collusion. They're lying to you about global warming. I present all these calculations so somebody can dispute what I'm saying. I'm just an engineer, a former engineer. What do I know about atmospheric conditions? But I've proved to you by calculation, the oceans are not rising. The oceans will never rise. And we don't have anything to worry about with climate change.